So this, everybody, is Sarah McCartney, who is an artisanal, I guess you'd call it an artisanal perfumer. Um,
Yeah,
you
I
agree
miss
with that?
that syllable off. I just go with artisan perfumer.
An
But yeah,
artisan perf. Is there such a word as artisanal?
yes, there is. But I think it's from the French mostly. They like to say artisanal, which
Okay.
sounds so much better than artisanal.
Hmm.
So just to imply that I actually make it myself. That's what I
Okay.
mean. Or I say that just to so that the industry that makes huge quantities of things doesn't think that I'm attempting in any way to claim that I am one of them.
Okay. All right. All right. I mean, you're definitely not one of them because the stuff you do is so well, I mean, it's wide ranging. I mean, just to give people an example, well, a few examples. I mean, you take inspiration from literature. So you've got a perfume called Le Jardin de Monsieur McGregor. Um, Another one, bit what Bilbo Baggins's sandwich. That's
Yeah,
another
yeah, I
one.
had to make one. This was for an American who lives in Louisville, Kentucky, and he's a graphic designer. And we met at a trade show in Los Angeles where there was no Wi-Fi and no visitors. So some people sat and sulked, and others of us just went round and got to know each other. And in
Uh-huh.
fact, this is the place where I got this bracelet in exchange for perfume. And some of us made lots of contacts and others just went, yeah, there's no Wi-Fi. And you immediately decided which camp you belonged to. So
Mhm.
I made friends with Tyler D, who didn't have an interest in fragrance because he couldn't see how it related to his life. And then suddenly he went, you can make things that smell like that and this and that. And I always wanted the fragrance of the Hobbit setting off on his journey. And he actually has
And
produced
everybody.
called Underhill, which was the Hobbit alias thing. So that he put it into beeswax and made a beautiful wooden case for it, and it sells from his place in Louisville, Kentucky. So yeah,
Okay.
unusual links we have somehow.
So that's how that one came into being. But there's also, I mean, so that's a literature link, but there's also you've done stuff for a not a laundry advert, for a washing machine advert. Yeah, which is actually the smell. It's the smell of freshly cleaned laundry, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it is. I've got to admit, I have worked for some huge clients in a tiny way. One was Google, and this one was Samsung, and I had to sign something originally that said this is deathly secret, don't say anything to anybody. All I knew was it was going into a washing machine shaped bottle. There are only 100 bottles, in fact 99 plus we wrote one, and it was going to press. What I didn't know till the day it came out that it was going to feature double Olympic gymnast Max Whitlock doing gymnastics on top of a washing machine
Yeah, we
in
saw
a
that.
spoof fragrance ad. And of course, the fragrance is real, but I had no idea it was actually on the Piccadilly lights in Piccadilly Circus.
Hmm.
And I really, and so it's had massive amounts of press, but there isn't any to buy.
Okay.
So,
There's no perfume to buy. You can't buy the
oh,
perfume.
no, the 99 bottles all went to Samsung, to the press office. And if you buy a washing machine at Cold Drops Yard in King's Cross, you can get a free bottle.
Okay.
Otherwise, it went to certain key press who might write about it, but mostly in the ad industry, not in perhaps in the washing machine industry. I don't know, but you can't, as a customer, go into a shop and try and buy a bottle of freshly laundered by Samsung times Max Whitlock because it's a real fragrance, but it's there's only these 99 bottles in the world. So
That's such a pity. I bet a lot of people would want one. I mean, I'd happily douse myself in the smell of clean laundry. That would be that would
well,
be fine by me.
I mean, well, and quite a few people have inquired, and it does give me joy to watch Max squirt himself with the stuff in the commercial, that spoof commercial. But I think I've asked permission. Am I actually allowed, because there's leftovers, am I allowed to sell it? Because it seems a shame that it has one of the world's biggest advertising campaigns ever,
Mhm.
and I can't sell it.
And you can't do anything with it. Yeah, that
Just
is a
typical
pity.
of my life. yeah.
Yeah.
I vaguely like to have been subject to a massive ad campaign I don't make any money out of. I'm weirdly proud of that.
I mean, it's not like you haven't had other, other outlets in the meantime. So yeah, so continuing with my list, there's also the classical music. So you've done perfumes inspired by pieces. Have you done perfumes inspired by whole pieces, or is it more that you've sort of accompanied pieces of classical music with different smells at different points in that piece?
I have mostly, for classical, I have mostly been interacting with the sounds and created different aromas for different moods at different points.
Mm-hmm.
So, and those aren't things which I've made for sale. I've made other things based on blues, folk, and pop songs and rock, but like the 3 minute song,
Mm-hmm.
which tends to have the same mood from the start to the finish.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah.
Unless it's Bohemian Rhapsody, I haven't done that. But something like "Take Me to the River," that's a song based on the Talking Heads version of the original Al Green thing. But yeah, with classical, I fragranced Acis and Galatea, performed at St. John Smith Square.
Oh, did you?
So
Okay.
yeah, we had to have the smell of the countryside for the opening, lovely, happy, everybody, we're all happy. And then the smell of foreboding for the attempted murder and attempted rape. Get them right. And then at the end, the smell of fresh water when Acis was converted into a magical stream. So yeah, those happened. And foreboding was quite a challenge. But
Yeah, how do you do that in perfume? That is interesting. But I mean, also it just struck me. I mean, there is one perfume you have done, which is and is it called something like in the Midnight Garden? Sort of a kind of
yeah, Midnight
exotic.
in the Palace Garden.
No, that's it, Midnight in the Palace Garden, which reminds me. Well, I mean, from the description of it, reminds me of Scheherazade, Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade, and it just. So yeah, it just struck me that maybe some pieces of classical music might work well. Kind of could be summed up in one perfume, perhaps.
I would say yes, and I think that Midnight in the Palace Garden is an almost perfect Scheherazade. Yes, that it's made of 4 parts. So that it has trees. Because I'm picturing it. I'm picturing, the sheikh racing across the desert in his camel, can't wait to get home, and then having a nice lie down in this beautiful, peaceful garden where there are trees and beautiful white flowers, and someone's brought him some coffee and some fruit juice and a few sweets, and as he's lying down staring at the stars. So yeah, I do tend to put them together a little bit like that.
It seems interesting. I mean, with all these different sources of inspiration, I'm guessing that perfume for you is something much more than just a pleasant smell. Maybe it's perhaps something that evokes a whole world.
Yeah, I never started with pleasant smell, and the only ones I've really made which have a short story to them are when I've made them for somebody else and they've said, I really want it to smell like this. And they might know why and they might know not, but they want a thing. And then generally I will try and make them smell just exactly the way the client wants. So that might not have all my backstory and thinking to it. But I mean, clean laundry, that just had to smell like clean laundry, please. So I kind of researched what's normally in laundry powders. They said not conditioner, because fabric conditioner, they all have their own very distinctive smells that could almost be perfumes of their own. But more like traditional washing powder, lots of synthetic musks. They wouldn't use animals, that would be terrible. But there's this certain, soft, clean smell associated with laundry. So, but that had to be a very specific thing. If I'm trying to evoke something else, then I can go, well, we did a Debussy string quartet,
Okay. Oh, you mean with Bittersweet, with that multi-sensory company? Yeah.
Yes. And so when I heard that start to finish, I thought, to me, it was quite obvious that it was the very beginning of the River Thames, starting as a little tinkly stream and then getting a little bit more busy as it goes through a few towns and lots of trees, and then it hits London, and then it broadens out at the end as it reaches the North Sea. And as I listened to it for, properly for the first time in ages, that was just, you couldn't argue with that. That was obviously the inspiration. So, which it obviously wasn't, but it might have been the scent, who knows. But so I created aromas to smell like that, leading like reaching the seaside at the end, starting off very countryside and light and fresh. So yes, those were like moments. But I guess I could put the whole thing together, get an entire. But it has different moods.
Get the whole essence.
Yes.
I mean, I suppose it's a bit like summing up the essence of a person. People are very complicated, but if you're going to give them one perfume, what do you choose? I mean, that is something that you do as well. You make bespoke perfumes for people. So
yes, and you'll find strange things like one individual aroma chemical can smell very complex to people because it reminds them of a lot of things. And I had someone visit the studio once who is sort of an expert in amber fragrances, all of which have vanilla in them. And so she smelled a single molecule vanillin, which is in every Mr. Whippy and every custard cream, and birds. And she smelled that, and she said, "Oh my goodness, that's so complex." And chemically, it's not. It's just one little molecule, well, big molecule. But in her head, it was reminding her of every cake she'd ever eaten and every vanilla perfume she'd ever smelt and every amber fragrance she'd ever worn. And so to her, it gave her complexity as she was smelling it. And sometimes you can create a fragrance which has hundreds of naturals in, not hundreds, tens, say. But each natural is made out of hundreds of chemicals. So a natural, it's a bit like playing one single note on the violin, and you measure it with a sound machine, and you see all the different waves coming out, all the different harmonics, but it's one single note. You put all of those together with naturals, and people just say, "Oh, that's really nice. It smells fresh," and it doesn't appear complicated at all. It appears very clean and simple, and yet it's made up of so many different things. So there's the link between what people are smelling and what they then think, what it evokes for them, it does not necessarily bear any relation to what I put in it.
It's funny because you talk about it almost as though it were a painting, or a novel somebody was writing with all these different elements to it, and yet, I mean, you don't get, for example, in a newspaper, you don't get a column for the latest perfumes, and that would go side by side with the latest books or the latest plays or films. And so I wonder if you think, why is it that perfume gets kind of left out of the equation so often?
Well, this did happen once. There was a column in the New York Times by a man called Chandler Burr, who had been an economist, and he curated the first perfume exhibition as art at the Museum of Modern Art in New York as well. So this has been a thing, but it's partly to do with the Enlightenment or non-Enlightenment. When it was decreed that things that you smell and taste and touch were not sufficiently educational, things that you read and hear were for enlightenment of human beings, but the other things were sort of animal. And then there's this thing that perfume is vanity, that if you scent yourself or wear makeup or dress up a bit, then it's somehow not pure art, it is vanity. Whereas if you spent a lot of money on a very expensive painting and put it on your wall, no one would say, "Oh, you're just showing off, aren't you? You're trying to draw attention to your wall." But you wear a fragrance which might have been put together with as much care and skill, and say, Oh, there's a very anti-intellectual thing about perfume, and even one of my teachers back at is still alive, uh, who found out that I was making perfume now, and he sort of said, "Oh, we'd been hoping for great we've been
Great
hoping for
things.
great things from you." Yeah. Cheers, mate. Thanks for that. You know,
I guess it's very immediate perfume, isn't it? I mean, you smell something and it kind of and there's some yeah, there is something kind of primitive, isn't there,
yeah.
about your reaction to that smell. You know, I remember smelling a pencil case from my primary school years later, you know, 15 years later, that had the pencil case had just been, you know, buried somewhere, and I opened it and it was like I was back at primary school, you know, that smell of
Yeah.
pencil shavings, and you know, and it was nothing, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything that could have transported me back in that same way.
No, this is Virginian cedarwood, and I can smell it now. I have here, I've got on the desk here, I've got a lot of things, but if Virginian cedarwood's not actually a cedar, it's a juniper, but there you go. But you sharpen this, the essential oil of Virginian cedar is released.
Mm.
And that's the same essential oil which is used in cedar perfumes, which there's a very short distance between the olfactory bulb and the brain. And it's the emotional part and memory part of the brain, which is to keep us safe and out of danger. So we have this immediate response, which is love it, hate it, eat it, run away, you know, ooh, smoke, run. And this is because that was such a strong part of our evolutionary success. We might live if we could smell a tiger and run like hell.
Mm-hmm.
We might die if we couldn't. So we still have that response, even though we're not always aware of it. We are constantly, those of us whose sense of smell still works, because of course there's the COVID difficulty. But even though it's not reporting in all the time, and we're not saying, oh, I can smell that, I can smell that, our brains are telling us whether things are normal or not, or if it's something we should be scared of, or if it's something. The attract repel response is very, very fast. So, but another thing that happens is you put a perfume on, and if you really, really like it, your brain goes, oh, yeah, we like that one. So what's next? And it forgets. It just doesn't tell you you're wearing it.
Mm-hmm.
So you might go out and see somebody else, and they say, oh, you smell lovely. And you say, oh, really? I can't smell it anymore. Because our own brains go and switch something off if it's normal. They don't worry us with it. Apparently other animals don't. So other animals can constantly just go, I can still smell that. But they rely more on their noses. But our brains are able to say, yes, fine, calm. Now, okay, what's new? Mm-hmm. But that's why if you go outside and then you come back in somewhere, you think there's no smell in the room you're in. Like, say, if you go to the gym and you've been in a class where there's lots of jumpy about, and you go out and you think the class doesn't smell, you go out, you come back in, like, oh my god, it stinks in here. Mm-hmm. Because the brain has been saying, well, it's fine, it's supposed to smell like this. Mm-hmm. It goes out, it refreshes it, you go through a portal, it's like it's almost like switching it off, switching it back on again. You come back in, and what happened? There's a smell in here which we'd forgotten was there. So it's really complicated. And now that smell is back in the academic sphere, there's a lot of research coming out about it, which is wonderful because it had been ignored for a couple of 100 years.
Yeah, but I mean, you are ahead of the trend in this way, because you've been doing this now for how long? For 24 years?
Well, my first 14 though was writing about it.
And you wrote for Lush, didn't you? You were head writer for Lush.
Yeah, for a long time was the only writer for Lush. And then by the time I left, there was a big bunch of international writers, and I was kind of supervising them, getting how to get the chatty style of the Lush Times into lots of other languages that not all of them have a chatty style. Mm-hmm. So that was about how to convey in words the impression that a smell will give. So I had to learn a lot about materials and a lot about different aromas and how to make sure that people bought the things which were right for them and not the ones which weren't.
And
But,
were you into perfume and smell even before that?
oh, I was, but I was not one of those people who had a whole shelf full as I do now. I have several shelves full, but I mostly don't wear them. They're for reference.
Mm-hmm.
But I bought my first own fragrance when I was 16 after I did my O levels, and that was Diorella.
Mm-hmm.
And I still love that sort of almost more than anything. It was like smelling that was like it was like love at first sight. It's like you see someone and you think, oh my goodness, that person just looks just for me. And I smelled Diorella, and I had never smelled anything so beautiful. And I've still got some vintage bottles of it for just getting out and reminding myself. So yeah, it's a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose well. I chose early and I chose well. And then I went through different phases. But I was mostly a one or two at a time person, like most people are. And then, open the floodgates.
Mm-hmm. And so you were experimenting yourself with smells and teaching yourself, I guess.
I blended essential oils, which is where lots of people start. And because very rarely does anyone tell you about things which are not naturals, which we all use to make perfume. So when people start dabbling, it was only after I left Lush that I started to find out the reason why if you blend essential oils together in the sort of three top, mid, three base, put them together, it smells awful. It doesn't smell like perfume. I had to then discover all the secret, marvelous aroma chemicals which actually make these things happen. It's a bit like, performing in the wrong space.
Mm-hmm.
You can rehearse as you say your wind quintet is rehearsing in somebody's back room, and then they're allowed to perform in a concert hall, and that's how you make it sound like this. Giving things space, and yeah, there are other elements to it, not just the sound or not just the smell. So aroma chemicals are actually used in the industry to make that happen. So once I'd left Blush, I started exploring those. It was very difficult to get hold of them in small quantities, but got some. And so now I teach that. I now run courses. That's mostly what I've been doing during lockdown. I used to do workshops at my studio, and now I've been putting them all online to unlock and unleash people who've got stuck just using naturals and can't understand why it won't smell like perfume. That's my aim in life.
Is it quite mathsy, figuring out all the proportions and knowing what proportion alcohol, etc., and then what proportion of this perfume to that perfume? I mean, do you need a bit of a further maths degree for it, or?
I only have 2 maths A levels and half a maths degree, but you don't need that. But I'm very glad. I thought I'd wasted my life doing all that maths, but actually now it comes to it, it means that when I come to do very simple maths, which is what this is, it's very easy for me. The maths that we have to do for perfume, some people find baffling, complex, and totally off-putting, because it's a lot about percentages and working at different percentages. So actually understanding what that means and how to then calculate what's actually in the perfume when you've been working at different dilutions in ethanol. So I say to people that if they're not good at maths, find a friend who is. A lot of perfumers actually need some. Said I put that together, and their friends go, okay, let's track this back for you. Because you need a bit. It's fundamentally you can make a nice perfume without having to understand the chemistry of everything that's in there. If you can smell things and feel what they do, you don't have to know the volatility and the chemical weight and how something reacts to something else. But if you can't do a percentage, you're stuck. Or you need a friend. So
okay, but once you've put them all together, then hopefully, I mean, a lot of it must be just in your imagination and knowing, I guess, a bit like cooking, knowing that sour will go with sweet, that you need a bit of acidity for this, and so you can kind of maybe feel your way through it a little bit.
Absolutely. And was it only yesterday? Yeah, because I'm doing Zoom classes with my students, and one of the assignments I set is to take, I make a pretty nice floral musk fragrance, very inoffensive, and then I say, right, and this 1%, you're going to take one of your materials that you've put away because you don't like it, and you're going to put that in that space and see what happens to your fragrance.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, I had no idea this would happen. I put a bit of this thing I really didn't like, I put in, and all the citruses started to sparkle. So it is a little bit like cooking. It's about like if somebody were to, you handed round the ingredients for a cake and said, here, taste this flour. And everybody would say, I'm not putting that in a cake. It would ruin it. Mm. And that's only because they don't know that first of all, you have to do the egg and the butter. And then you've got to put to, and then you've got to fold the flour in. And then, if you do it in the right order and in the right quantities, then you'll make a stunning, lovely thing happen that you weren't expecting.
Mm-hmm. But mm-hmm. It's like potion making. It's kind of witchcraft, a little bit. Totally. And it also makes me think a bit of wine tasting. With wine, you get people sort of talking about how you can taste a bit of this chocolate note and this bit of this citrus thing, and you always wonder how much of that is for real. I mean, are there actual sort of chocolate notes in this wine, and how much of that is kind of made up? Is it kind of mythology? I mean, does the same thing apply to perfume? Do you think people kind of imagine things sometimes that just aren't there, or describe something which just isn't there? Or actually, is it quite kind of legitimate to talk about these, this little flavor being there and this little flavor?
Okay. Well, firstly, that's almost two questions, because with wine, I used to think that was all complete. They're making it up. It's just wine. But once I started working in perfume, I now get all those things that wine people talk about. Mm. And I started, because I didn't drink wine for a long time, not that's a choice, but and then I'd smell what my husband was drinking, and I said, oh, okay, citrus and toffee and things, and I turned into, Jancis Robinson used to be on the television when I was growing up, and I would think, but you can learn to recognize it, and I liken it, orchestrally to someone who's never heard an orchestra before and sits and listens to a piece and goes, oh, that's amazing. And then, oh, I like that bit. And the musician will say, oh, well, that's interesting, because at that point it actually modulated, and you'll find that they changed the oboe to the cor anglais, and that happens. And the person just listened to, never heard an orchestra before, like my friend Stimmy, who was brought up in the Sikh culture, and she's sitting there going, oh, but didn't have the experience to distinguish the different lines and the textures going on. So it's a lot like that with perfume as well. And I almost wish I could go back just to smelling a fragrance and thinking, oh, I love that one, or oh, I hate that one. Because now I think everything's quite good. And I can understand how they were put together and why I don't like one I don't like. So I'm not so repelled by it as I used to be. Mm-hmm. But one magic thing is that if somebody smells something and you say to them, do you smell the rose? They go, oh, yes. Mm. Because the brain with smell, it's not like you can see a color. You can look behind me and go, well, orange. But if you see, so you can just about distinguish different colors. Say, right, okay, that's red in a painting. You smell a fragrance and it goes like or dislike. But if you say to somebody, it's a little bit cucumbery, isn't it? And they go, oh, yes, that's what it is. I recognize it now. And even with individual materials, if you pass them around, like on a smelling strip, and somebody will smell it and go, oh, I know that. And what is it? And is it orange? And they go, of course it is. How did I not know it was orange? And it's that speech developed so much behind smell, chronologically, thousands of years later. So they're not as connected up in the brain as we imagine that they are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's often why perfumes will have a notes list written on the tester, so that the salesperson can say, oh yes, this one has apricot and jasmine and sandalwood and patchouli, and the person can say, oh yeah, I think I get that now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think no one can smell more than 4 things at once. I think that's what they say. But even by top perfumers, you can smell, you know how to get there, you probably know how to put it together, but you might put it together with different things from the ones that created it.
Okay. And was it you who was saying that you can actually kind of guide someone towards finding a smell pleasant or unpleasant through the power of suggestion, or maybe by saying, doesn't this smell a bit like this, and perhaps this is quite a pleasant thing, or saying, or a bit like this, and this is actually quite a horrible smelling thing?
I'm not sure if it was me, but it's that is around. That is quite an experimental thing that has been done, and because a lot of people are convinced that they get headaches from perfume, and actually it tends to be the memory of something that they associate with that perfume. Mm-hmm. And even if the perfume isn't in the room, they would get the headache. So you can't, and I saw this happen to a man sitting on my sofa once who said, well, there's only one thing that gives me a headache, makes me feel ill, I can't go anywhere near it, and that is, I think it was Kouros. Kouros, his ex-boyfriend used to wear it. And I said, well, the interesting thing is, this is not the Kouros that's giving you the headache. It's thinking about the end of this relationship. It's stress. And your brain immediately goes, oh yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that thing. Take me away from that thing. And I said, so, if you picture the Kouros bottle, and he went, oh my God, I'm getting the headache. and he was, and the Kouros wasn't there. Mm-hmm. So, and you can also make people, there was a television program that said, well, you watch this, we are actually going to put into the room, we are going to transmit this terrible smell into your living room. It's an experiment, see what happens. Thousands of people threw up, and there was no smell. But the suggestion, so there are now movements of we've got to get perfume banned because they're evil and they give us headaches. And they just don't. If people have lost their sense of smell, and they never get a headache from anything that they can smell. But Angel seems to be a particular perfume that people are afraid of. It's actually fear, and it's an old, deep, evolutionary thing. If they worked with somebody who wore Angel and they were a bit terrified of them and they didn't like that workspace, and they smell Angel, they think it's the Angel that's giving them a headache and making them feel ill. And actually it's their brain saying, oh, that's like with the pencil case in school. If you hated your school and you smelt that, you would get a headache. Mm-hmm. But if you liked your school and you smelt it, you think, oh,
that's nice.
Yeah. So the perfume, whichever one it is, but that one seems to just have been worn by powerful, bossy people. If you say to yourself, brain, I know what you're doing, and you're not going to fool me. I know that it's not the perfume, it's my memory. So I'm going to remember what that was. I'm going to forget about it. And I'm going to learn that this smell actually is really nice. Mm-hmm. So you can do that. And as perfumers, we work with some aromas which other people are totally repelled by. But we know that if we put that 1% in, it'll make something beautiful happen. So we're going smelling things like civetone. They've recreated the smell of what civets excrete from their interesting passages. Or, we will smell civet and go, oh, that's cool. And you pass it round to people who are unaware of the civet smell, and they will they leap back in horror and go, you put that in perfume. So yeah, you can learn to love some things, and you can learn to hate some really lovely aromas because they've been associated with a bad place that you were in.
Maybe there's one advantage right there in making bespoke perfumes, because you're never going to smell that smell ever again. You're not going to get it mixed up with a different person.
Yeah, yeah, this is true. And yeah, having your own. I mean, there are thousands available. There are 1,500 perfumes released every year into the market, and so there's one argument with, well, can't you just go out and find one that you like? But there isn't everything available at the time. I used to use the example, well, if I want to buy a pair of pink elephant cord flares, and I go into a shop, there aren't any pink elephant cord flares. They went out in about 1982. Except now I own a pair of pink elephant cord flares because they've come back. So, but there are trends in perfume the same as there are trends in fashion. It's just that the perfume ones, of course, are less easy to see. Because so at the moment everything's sort of pink candy and fluffy, and men's ones are really intensely woody, and that's in mass market. Then you get the area in the middle, which are these perfumes are for humans, and you can wear whatever you like. And I sit right in the middle of that one. And if somebody wanted the smell of arriving and walking across an arid desert through fires that have now been put out, with the smell of boot polish and camphor, and then a rose or an interesting flower that's just beginning to bloom through the desert. I made that for one night. And that was quite difficult.
That's difficult. But also, I think there was one video in which you were saying that the kind of thing people say they like is not always what they actually like.
Yes. The famous Body Shop White Musk one.
Maybe it was that one. And you had a good strategy for trying to get to what people actually want.
Yeah, and it actually has to be, it's the like what question. If somebody says, well, this particular case was, I like things that smell deep, dark, and heavy. And I was making deep, dark, heavy fragrances for her. And she kept saying, oh, no, not like that. And eventually I said, like what? After 25 goes, like what? And she said, like Body Shop White Musk. And I said, but that's light and fluffy and soft. And she said, oh, no, it's a musk. That's deep, dark, and heavy. So she'd actually learned that the smell of soft and fluffy to everyone in the perfume world, for her, that's what deep, dark smelled like. And she's a novelist, and now I read her books, and every time she mentions a deep, dark, heavy fragrance, I know she actually
means White Musk.
Yeah, she doesn't mean Miss Dior Original. She means Body Shop White Musk. So what I learned was just ask people, what do you like? What do you normally wear? What things? And then, get the bottles out and put them on a strip and say, right, well, do you like this? And because the vocabulary for fragrance is very limited, even for people who work in it, it's very limited. So somebody says, like, what does this new material smell like? Well, it's a bit like cheese, but it also has elements of jasmine, and there's a little bit of hazelnut if you try hard. How can that even be? But it depends what you put it with as well. Some of these things are shapeshifters. So, but yeah, you really just have to try things.
So this is quite a personal question, but do you have many perfumes that you wear? I can't imagine that you'd be content with one perfume, being a perfumer.
Well, the first part of the question, I have many perfumes? I have hundreds, but that's partly because I went on a quest at one point to find perfumes I wanted to put in a novel that I wrote, which set me off making them because I couldn't find them. So I acquired sort of a shelf full, because I can't walk into a perfume shop, have a very long conversation with someone, then leave without buying something. I think it's rude. So I accidentally accumulated. But I don't wear all of those. But they're very handy for events, for people learning about different fragrances. I find that I mostly wear things I have made now, because mostly I'm not making them for other people. Mostly I'm making them for me, but I'm prepared to share them with other people so that I can continue to make perfume. It's kind of my business strategy from when I was 7 and like making jewelry. Is if I can make a lot and sell some, then I can keep some and I can buy some more. Very basic commerce from the age of 7 I was. also at that point I had declared to my teachers that I was a witch. So well spotted. But they got a bit worried, but it's fine. So basically, I love making new things. In order to make new things, I have to sell some of the stuff I have.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly I like making things myself. I've made Meet Me on the Corner, which is based on a Lindisfarne song from 1972.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, that I feel like, okay, fine, I've got that now. I can retire. But the next one I'm working on a sort of cherry rose. Our Korean distributor wanted a cherry fragrance, and so I make several different variations. And the rose with cherry, it's not natural cherry. You can't make perfume out of cherries, so you have to recreate the aroma of cherry, which is quite a challenge. But I'm thinking that I'm going to start wearing that one. But yeah, I wear Tokyo Spring Blossom, which is one of my earliest.
Mm-hmm.
Wash Me in the Water, and which is the other half of Take Me to the River.
Mm-hmm.
Take Me to the River is Saturday night going out and doing naughty things, and Wash Me in the Water is Sunday morning waking up and thinking, oh. So I wear that, not that I'm naughty. So I rotate about 4 at the moment. There's one called Clouds, which I absolutely love, which is irises, orris, and narcissus, and chypre, and there's oak moss, patchouli, and yeah, I'm on about 4.
I wonder if anyone has ever tried telling a story entirely through smell. No words. Maybe everybody's doing this. I don't know, but with no words, no music, just smell, and you could almost read the smells like a novel.
Yeah, and just change. Yeah, I've never done it separate from words or music or something else that was showing, or pictures. Yeah,
you just type out the smells and get people to come back at you at the end with what they thought was happening in the story.
We had a bit of an adventure last year. I do think called the January Joy Box, which is, I think there are enough advent calendars and there's enough going on before Christmas. Everyone's too busy, and so I made a January Joy Box with sort of the come down, and then now what? And I think 70 people around the world had these 10 fragrances, and every 3 days they would try a new one, and we all compared them. So that's sort of as close as I did, but they didn't really have a narrative. I didn't put them in I put them in a specific order, but they weren't necessarily to come to a conclusion. But there was one I was supposed to make the smell of oil for a Kazakh client, because oil is funds Kazakhstan, and they wanted the smell of black oil bursting from the ground, and it completely freaked some people out. They actually felt as if they'd been buried alive. That was it was called Subterranea. That was a bit of a clue, but so yeah, it is possible just to give somebody a smell and say, right, where are you and what's happening? And it does evoke some really strong feelings in people, but it doesn't necessarily evoke, in fact, it almost definitely doesn't evoke the same emotions in different people, because they will have had different life experiences. And that's where we bring with us our appreciation and our reactions to fragrance. Is that some of them are innate, we believe, but some of them are learned. But we say babies love the smell of poo, babies like smelling poo, but it's only when you tell them that they've got to stop messing around with it that they start thinking that it's horrible. But
that's interesting. Is that intrinsic, or is that learned?
That's just what I was thinking. We seem to have an intrinsic dislike of rotten smells, a fear of, because they tend to be associated with disease and decay and harm and poison. So we tend to be repelled by those. There is research that shows that men are less repelled by horrid smells than women are, which is quite funny. But
that is interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. And it's also interesting that sort of unpleasant, or what I guess many people would class as unpleasant smells, play quite a significant part in what you do. You know, and like you were saying, you were trying to create the smell of foreboding, and with the petrol smell as well. You know, so I guess a lot of what you do is not really trying to give people a nice and enjoyable time, but trying to maybe take them to quite uncomfortable places in a way, and in the same way that somebody would if they were watching I don't know, a slasher or something.
Yeah,
you know, that's it, the same thing.
Yes, or even reading a biography from someone who has had terrible experiences and trying to get them to understand how that felt. So, I mean, yes, most of the fragrances which I sell are, they have an element of pleasantness. They're mostly pleasant. But the fragrances where it gets exciting working in more art-based collaborations, that's when we can tend to go somewhere really weird. Well, I made 3 pretty nasty ones for Febreze once.
Febreze, huh?
Yeah, I was ended up on the phone to the Procter and Gamble's research department saying, guys, why aren't you doing this? And they went, because it would take us 18 months and they have given us 3 weeks, because it was a PR thing. They wanted to send out to the press their new cappuccino scented spray for Christmas, and I had to make the smell of Brussels sprouts and blue cheese and bin bags that had been hanging around a few days to prove that spray them and then spray the Febreze to prove that the Febreze could get rid of it.
Okay.
So they were boxed in perfume bottles in this lovely presentation. So yeah, I've actually.
Okay. So this wasn't Febreze that was intended for kind of mass consumption for people to spray in their own bathrooms necessarily.
No. This was just to demonstrate how very effective Febreze is when you have these awful smells around. Can you make them go away with?
And it did.
Yeah, they did. There's certain things that it couldn't do. Actually, there are some smells that it can't encapsulate and get rid of. So that one had to be crossed off the list, and I had to reformulate it and managed to make something so horrible Febreze couldn't cope. But yeah, that was
worse than the smell of bin bags left out. And
yeah, they originally wanted farts, but they decided that was too much. So, but actually, most of the things that you would use, you can't legally make fart smell because they're actually poisonous to have at concentrated levels, these materials that you would put in. So they can't be used for fragrance and flavoring. So.
Oh gosh, that gives you pause for thought, doesn't it?
Genuine poisonous farts, yeah.
Crikey. Yeah. Gosh. Well, on that note, I mean, I would quite like to carry on talking to you really for quite a long time. But yes, you'll have all sorts of other things that you want to do. I mean, just make perfumes for one thing. But quickly before I let you go, what are you working on at the moment? I mean, apart from, are you mostly working on making individual scents, or are you working on the kind of collaborative stuff as well?
At the moment, what's actually on the slate, written up on the wall, was "Do This Next." Is I'm just delivering a lovely aroma of a whiskey storage warehouse in Dublin, where the whiskey is stored in oak barrels and the bit of it escapes. So it's the Angel's Share fragrance. That one's nearly finished. I'm developing the different cherry fragrances. I've got a sandalwood frankincense for an individual who ordered that one from me. And I'm working on a kind of set of cocktail-inspired room fragrances. So I'm doing a lime and coconut today with probably some rum ether in there as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I've got to start thinking about next year's interesting, entertaining ones. And then when collaborations turn up, and then they tend to be pretty fast. If someone says, right, we need this and we need to do it, we need to do it now. So it's like, whoosh. At the moment, only one for Steph, which is, I think, secret right now. But yeah.
Yeah, it's quite nice because what you do is quite lockdown proof.
Yes, we took a big hit on our workshops because normally at least 2 weekends a week. It was about a third of our income. People coming into the studio. So what we did was we turn things into sort of little kits with little bottles like this, and smelling strips, and so instructions, and sent those out to people instead.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but you can do you can do a lot of it online.
Yes, you can now. Yes,
and
it took me about 6 months
because quite solitary. I mean, yes, I mean, something I was thinking was that you know, when we were talking about why isn't perfume up there with, you know, with film and with theatre, etc., as an art form. I was thinking, I guess maybe because it's quite solitary as well,
and it's hard to get into. It's very expensive. You can't, for the price of a not bad secondhand guitar, you could only buy about 4 materials and a few bottles, you know, and then you're finished. So if you're thinking of starting up, yes, it's solitary. Although I've enabled a lot of little WhatsApp groups going, so people swap materials amongst themselves and chat, because people do feel a bit alone doing it. But it's usually just the expense of finding all the materials, working out what you want, knowing what you want from the description, and people accidentally spend hundreds and then find that they can't make anything nice. So I'm really trying very hard to get people not to waste anything. That's one of my big aims. Start small and don't waste anything.
Okay, gosh, well, I'm looking forward to getting to know more of your work. And it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. It's been lovely.
Thank you. And I hope our paths will cross again at some point, you know, in the flesh.
Yeah, I hope so. Yes, in real life.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy the lime and coconut.
Oh, thank you.
Bye bye.
See you.